Okay, so the rules for these budget decks are: one, it can't use the solo adventures because a lot of people are trying to save gold so they can buy the next expansion, so trying to cater towards those people. And I will also talk about how you could possibly put them in to make them better if you have the cards. And two, only using the absolutely required legendaries. And as you can see with this Mage deck, which is this deck that I'm going to start off with, it has 3 legendaries. It is the 3 Highlander cards, and if you don't have them, you probably shouldn't play Highlander Mage in general, just because the lack of consistency is only made up for by these super powerful cards. So those are pretty much the general ground rules for this list. And there are going to be some already existing decks and some decks that I made budget by cutting down everything that I possibly could. So without further ado, we'll just jump into Mage. Mage, this deck, the full version of the deck costs about 2,100 dust. If I can just enhance this. Zoom enhance. I should have been a little more prepared. 2,100 dust. This version of the deck, the budget version that I have made, costs 7,160. I've cut the price in by 2/3 to 1/3. And basically, how I did that is, if we just zoom out here real quick, boop, 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 I took out Snip Snap. I took out Stargazer Luna. I took out Malygos. I took out Zeliax. I took out Luna's Pocket Galaxy, Tiamat, Alexstrasza, Calicos, the Amazing Reno, and all of the cards that were in the expansion, the mini expansion, like Arcane Amplifier and the Escaped Mana Saber. With that out of the way, basically what I was left with was a Highlander deck that essentially became kind of an anti-meta sort of build and something that could allow for survivability. So what I did was I made the curve a little bit less top heavy because you no longer have Stargazer Luna. So basically I put in an Acidic Swamp Ooze for the Hunter matchup. I put in an Albatross for potential Highlander matchups. Mind Control Tech for aggro matchups. Pyromaniac as a solid 3/4 for 3, which nobody plays for some reason, and can allow for card draw if you have a slow turn 4. Dragonmaw Poacher to deal with dragons. Silence to deal with Embiggen Druid. Along with Dragon Synergy, so you can pretty much guaranteed get the Arcane Breath, get the Fire Tree Witch Doctor, so you can get the I forgot what it was, but so you can get the Dragon Caster, and there's one other, and the Scale Rider. And if you have Malygos, you can throw the 5-mana Malygos in and have Dragon Synergy for that too. So we kept that all the same. I don't have Power of Creation in here. I probably should, but I no longer have the Tortilla Pilgrim in there either because they're both epics and I needed to cut the price even more. But if you have those cards, you can easily put them in for something like a Spellkin or Dragonmaw Scorcher or something. And then the last few changes that I made to the deck were the Evasive Worm for Tiamat with Divine Shield Rush. It essentially fulfills the same purpose and deals with a lot of similar minions. It's not as good, obviously, but it does the job. Rotten Apple Bomb was specifically for Zeliax. It's a 5-mana, so the curve is the same. Taunt with some healing aspects to it, which is great. And just overall, it became a kind of anti-meta deck that you basically try to survive as long as you can and use Zephyrus, Alexstrasza, and Reno as win conditions or tempo swings to win you the game. If you guys want to see gameplays of all of these videos, they will be coming out after this, like one at a time, after this list has come out, so you guys can actually see how effective they are. And I've already played a similar version of this deck, although I did have some of the cards from the mini expansion, the solo adventure, in here. And someone told me that I should take them out, and so I did, and this is the more updated version of the list, and I've already won a couple of games with this budget Highlander Mage last season at rank like 3, so it's proven to be at least decent. It was about I think it went 3-2, so it's nothing amazing, but it's solid, small sample size, I say it works. Moving on to Druid. So Druid already had a pretty budget deck, in my opinion, with Token Druid, and I can show you the list I used previously. It was never actually that expensive. If we just look at a screenshot here, the deck was already 5,800 dust, not that expensive, but I made it cheaper for you because I know not everybody has Varragoth or Goru. So the updated version, which is the version that I came up with, which is a very, very similar build. It'll be pretty much exactly the same. It's only 2,600 dust, and here's how it runs. Basically, what I took out was the Varragoth and the Goru, as I said, and I put in an extra Blessing of Ancients and an extra Power of the Wild, of which I only had one of each because Goru was literally basically Power of the Wild permanently on all Treants, or Blessing of Ancients for that matter. And Varragoth I just threw in there as some tempo on turn 4, which this deck lacks into turn 5 plays. So that's why I had them in there. I took them out because this just allows you to snowball your token board a little bit better and more consistently. Generally speaking, you have 2 solid 1-drops that are both really good. One gets you cards in hand for a guaranteed turn 2 play. The other one is a 2/2 for 1, which is solid. Then you have Dendrologist and the Dreamway Guardians, which either give you board presence or discover you a spell and is a 2-mana 2/3. Or the Shrubadier, which is a new card. Really like it. I think it's awesome. It's basically a 2-mana 3/3. Turn 3, you have Landscaping. That's really your only play. Turn 4, we really only have Garden Gnome. Turn 5, you have Force of Nature. And then you try to snowball into the late game if you can't finish them off with Savage Roar by killing them with Force Aid into they board wipe into you Force Aid again. They have no response. You Savage Roar, you win. That's basically your win condition right there. And then Mulch Muncher, if you draw it, can kill off pretty much any taunt. That's the general game plan of this deck. And at only 2,600 dust, it's really cheap, and I would very much recommend it. So now we have Hunter. Hunter is the face hunter, obviously. Just disclaimer, Dragon Aggro Hunter would actually still be a very, very strong deck, but it uses Rottennest Drake and Fellwing, and I said I wasn't going to use cards from the solo adventure, so they were disqualified. But if you have those cards, the cost is roughly the same, and I would recommend Dragon Aggro Hunter over this. But if you don't have the gold for the solo adventure, this is the deck for you. And this deck costs a grand total of 2,200 dust. I took out Leroy Jenkins. With Leroy Jenkins in here, it would be about 3,800. So if you have Leroy Jenkins, throw him in there for the Reckless Rocketeer. But just look at this deck. This is the stereotypical Go Face Hunter deck with solid turn 1 drops, along with the Toxic Reinforcements. You have a Secret Package with the Phase Stalker to get you a little bit of extra value, along with the Kobold Sand Trooper for extra damage. You have reliable 3-drops in the Animal Companion and your Eaglehorn Bow, and then you have finishing potential with Unleash the Hounds, Kill Command, Timberwolf, Life Drinker, and Reckless Rocketeer. It's a pretty simple deck. It's very easy to play. Oh my gosh, I played a similar deck list with Leroy and, well, with just Leroy from rank 5 to Legend like 2 seasons ago. So it's, although the meta is not necessarily as good for it now, with Dragon Hunter being slightly better and the meta shifting a little bit, this deck is still very, very strong, and you'll be able to rush people down. And if you really need to play Hunter because you want to, this is probably the budget deck to do it with. Okay, so obviously the budget deck for Paladin is going to be Mech Paladin. Mech Paladin is just extremely strong right now in general, and I really only had to take out Snip Snap, Ziliax, and Leroy, which Leroy we've already established can be replaced with Reckless Rocketeer. But just to show you the change in cost, it took the deck from about 7,000 to 2,600 in cost. If you've had difficulty seeing these, I'm sorry, but I am telling you, I am being accurate, not lying to you. But lowering the cost by about 4,400 is pretty significant for a lot of players, especially if they didn't get the free Snip Snap and they don't want to craft Snip Snap or Ziliax because they are rotating out soon, which is totally viable. I took them out and basically replaced the Snip Snap with Nightmare Amalgam. Yes, it's an epic. Yes, it is also cycling out soon, but you still need another reliable 3-drop. I think that the turn 3 play for Paladin needs to be stronger. And then for Ziliax, I put in a Blessing of Kings. It is another buff card similar to what Ziliax was going to be. And although you don't get the lifesteal and the survivability, you do actually get slightly better stats and a little bit of extra damage and a cheaper cost for Blessing of Kings. And it can go on anything, which is all great. But if you have the dust and if you have 2 Nightmare Amalgams, I would take out this Blessing of Kings for a second Nightmare Amalgam, because I think that turn 3 is just like the icing on the cake for the Paladin. If you can close that turn 3 play and have it so that they can't really compete and you're able to get a 3/4 out on the board, that's also a mech that you can magnetize things to. That's just, in my opinion, something that can close the deal. But again, this is supposed to be fully budget, so I only put 1 in and put in the Blessing of Kings. And if you have Leroy or any of the legendaries, obviously you could throw them in for whatever replacements you want. It's up to you. This is just the bare minimum, bare bones version of the deck that you can upgrade as you go. So Priest is in a pretty weak spot other than Resurrect Priest, but I do think Combo Priest is a viable budget option if you want to play Priest. It's strong enough. Like, it still functions the same exact way as Combo Priest did in the past. You basically wanna have heal synergy with Northshire Cleric and the Light Warden. You have Wild Pyrants with Acolyte synergy, and you can heal everything back up after you do damage with the Wild Pyromancer, which means that Northshire Cleric gets to pop off even more, as well as the Light Warden. You have a Met. A Met's kind of needed because using him allows you to get your minions to have a ton of health, which means that you can then Divine Spirit Inner Fire more reliably. And overall, it's a pretty solid deck. You also have Psychopomp to revive some of the minions that die right at the very beginning. And if you play Psychopomp after High Priest Amet, oh my god, that is a powerful play. If they don't deal with it that like very turn, it's so strong. But anyway, functions very similarly to old Combo Priest. You have an extra arms in here for just a little bit of extra stats in general. Just because, like, I don't know, it does lack damage in terms of, like, without Inner Fire and the Divine Spirit play. So the extra arms just allows you to make a minion a threat on the board, buy you some time. You get to wipe the board and some of the wide board, like, token creating thingies, like some Hunter decks, Druid. You can kill the lackeys and a rogue with Wild Pyrancer pretty easily. So, control the board, decent amount of draw, took up on Swarm Day and put in an extra Acolyte of Pain for a little bit of extra draw that way. And overall, it should work fine. I did have to take out the Dark Prophecy for the Injured Blade Master because it was a card from the solo adventure, and Injured Blade Master is actually probably still a fine card anyway. But yeah, that's the card that I took out to put in the Injured Blade Master back in. So anyway, hope you guys enjoy this deck. This deck is probably the one I would least recommend because Priest is in a really, really weak spot right now, just in general. But if you want to try out a Priest deck, this is the one that I would recommend because none of the other ones can even be played on a budget at all. So moving on. So this is my favorite deck of all of the budget decks on this list, and that's simply because of the fact that it performed so much better than I thought it was going to. I thought that Galakrond Rogue absolutely needed all of those legendaries. Like, if we just look here, look at all the legendaries that this deck has. This deck has Edwin, it has Snip Snap, it has Leroy, Zilliax, Flick, Togwoggle. Obviously I have Kronks and Galakrond, but Galakrond was given to you for free, okay? So mind that when I show you the cost of the budget version, okay? But I thought that it absolutely needed these things. Leroy Jenkins I knew could be replaced, but I was like, Zilliax is just so important. So is Edwin and Zilliax, and Flick and Togwoggle. How am I going to get the deck to function without it? Well, first let's just show you the dust of this deck. 4,500, which is pretty cheap, and Galakrond is free. So it's essentially a 3,000 dust deck, and having the Spirit of the Shark as your secondary win condition is actually phenomenal. Also, if you have Togwoggle, immediately take out Novice Engineer, put Togwoggle in there to get extra potential free cards. And if you can get all those free cards, whether you double activate Togwoggle's effect, or you double activate the free card effects, or you double activate a ton of lackeys that you've generated, or you double activate Evil Miscreant to get more lackeys in general. Like, this deck with Spirit of the Shark is so incredibly strong. I will admit, because of your lack of Zilliax and Snip Snap, the mid game you can get slightly overrun. It is definitely a little bit weaker now, but if you can get past that stage, the amount of damage, the amount of value you can get out of the lackeys is just absurd. Not to mention, you still have most of the same free things that you could potentially get from Galakrond. And if you have Togwoggle. And then, obviously, you have Kronks that you can then Shadow Step. You can also Shadow Step really big things like Life Drinker. Like, if you play Spirit of the Shark one turn, right? Turn, say, 5, because that way you can double activate Life Drinker. And you have a Life Drinker and a Shadow Step. That is 12 damage to their face turn 6, and you heal 12. If you have Spirit of the Shark out there. It's absolutely insane. And that doesn't even take into account you getting something for free with a Battle Cry. Oh my god, I'm a little biased with this deck. I absolutely loved how it played out. It did so much better than I thought it was going to do. I've already played some games with this deck on my channel, actually, which you can check out if you want, and I intend on playing it again to show that it works this season, so stay tuned for that, and moving on. Okay, so this deck in general, I think, is moderately underrated. I think that people just count Shaman out in this meta right now, and I think that Overload Shaman, just in general, is a good deck. I don't think it's necessarily phenomenal, but as an aggro deck, it's very consistent. It has Surging Tempest, Battle Mage, and the Sludge Slurper, all as viable turn 1 plays that are relatively strong. Sludge Slurper is kind of meh, but because you get a Lackey, the follow-up play is pretty decent. You have very good finishing potential with the the Doomhammer and Rock Battle Weapon and the Lava Burst, and you have consistent draw with Spirit of the Frog. You can wipe the board with Thunderhead. You have some pretty decent pumps, and then you have Bloodlust. Like, this deck actually has a lot of powerful aspects to it, and with not this version, with the fully made version with the legendaries, last season I went 3-1 with it, just playing around, and I really, really liked how it felt. So, rather than try to make a Galakrond Shaman deck, I opted to say that this deck was actually the best one, because it doesn't really require any legendaries. Vicina's easily replaced by Bloodlust, because they essentially do the same thing, except Bloodlust is 1 more mana for 1 more attack on all minions. And technically speaking, yes, you do have to use this as solely a finisher, whereas Vicina stays on the board, so you can actually get like 2, maybe even 3 attacks out of her. But Bloodlust essentially does the same thing she does. And Electra Storm Surge was kind of hard to replace, and I replaced it with an Epic. It feels terrible, but this 5 mana Maximus is just so strong, because you're going to have the overloaded mana crystals. Dealing 5 damage allows you to have some extra finishing potential that you end up lacking because you no longer have Electra Storm Surge. So I'm sorry about this one, but I included it. In terms of overall cost for this deck, if we look at Aggro Overload Shaman just in general, it's 6,500. This version of the deck is 3,720. The drop-off actually isn't as much as you might think, but that's because this deck actually has a couple of epics and stuff. Just in general, you have obviously the Doomhammers and the Thunderheads as 2 of the most powerful cards in your deck that you couldn't really take out. So it just had a pretty expensive core, not including the legendaries. But even so, very, very strong deck. Better than Galakrond Shaman just in general, and I think the budget version is better as well. So, Galakrond Zoolock. First of all, very underrated class just in general. Like, nobody's playing Warlock, even though Galakrond Warlock is phenomenal into most matchups because you have a ton of control, but also you can switch it into aggro because of all of the little tokens you can create. And then you have Zoolock, which can just overflood, like, most decks right now and win through just sheer aggro. But all that aside, this is the budget deck that I've come up with for Galakrond Zoolock. Now, Galakrond Zoolock originally looked like this: 7,720 dust with Leroy Jenkins, Galakrond, and the Sea Giants. I actually never really ran Kronks in here, and I'll explain why in a second. But so we have Snip Snap, Leroy Jenkins, and the 2 Sea Giants to take out to make this deck cheaper. The reason why I never ran Kronks is because he was just a little bit too late. You'd have to play Galakrond and then play Kronks at that point. And, I mean, at that point, you should have probably won already, or if you've lost board control at that point, you're probably going to lose unless you top deck Leroy, or in this case, Reckless Rocketeer. Sure, it is one more avenue to potentially win, but, like, for its cost, I literally replaced it with a Battle Mage so I could have a more consistent turn 1 play, and it's great. But anyway, took out Leroy Jenkins for Reckless Rocketeer, obviously. Reckless Rocketeer is a very, very strong card. It's a very strong replacement for the Leroy Jenkins. I took out the 2 Sea Giants for 2 Frostwolf Warlords, because I think that they're just very, very good alternatives. Like, sure, you don't necessarily get to cheese them out for cheap, but you can guaranteed play them on turn 5. So if you have a weak turn 5 play, or you don't have a board, if you had a Sea Giant, you'd have to sit there with a 10 mana card in your hand. But with this, you could at least play the 5 mana 4/4 for some tempo, just in case. Or if you only have 1 or 2 minions out there, a 5 mana 6/6 rather than the Sea Giant in hand that you can't play because it's like 8 or 7 mana. You could play this guy for 5, and he's absolutely phenomenal. It's great. I absolutely love this deck. And then the last thing is I took out Snip Snap and put in a Scarab Egg because essentially used for the Death Rattle, get some tokens, and everything works out all hunky-dory. Basically, with this deck, you want to just go full-on aggro, pump your things up with Grim Rally by killing the 1/1 little tokens that you create with, whether it be the Death Rattle, sacrificing the Death Rattle card itself, or sacrificing the 1/1 imps you make with invokes. And overall, you just overrun your opponent and have a really, really fun time blasting people with this deck. And it's budget. And the overall cost of this deck is actually only 3,700. And Galakrond is free, so it's essentially a 2,000 dust deck. So I hope you guys enjoy going to Warrior. Okay, so last deck, I know I said Hunter, I meant to say Warrior, I apologize, is Galakrond Warrior. Now, this one was kind of hard to do because just looking at the original deck for this, the original deck, 10,000 dust, required a couple of legendaries, Leroy, Snip Snap, and Kronks. Kronks I did end up keeping in here. But it also relied on a couple of cards from the solo adventure, being the Skipper, which actually made this deck really strong, and the Bomb Wrangler. And the Skipper allowed for a lot of combos with Armor Smith and Acolyte of Pain and the Wrangler in general. So taking it out did hurt, but let me explain the choices that I made. So first off, taking out Snip Snap and Leroy, I replaced them with two Kor'kron Elites. Leroy was replaced with it, obviously, for the charge ability. But then the Snip Snap was just because if I get to play Galakrond, having that extra burst potential with an extra chance of getting a charge minion to burst them down is just really, really nice. And having it in general, a 4/3, 4-mana charge is pretty decent just in general. So, you know, it's another viable turn 4 play. Like, if you don't have Devoted Maniac, you're probably not going to play Scion of Ruin. Gives you another turn 4 play. I like that. But anyway, to get rid of the solo adventure combo with the Skipper and the Bomb Wrangler was going to be hard. But I decided to go back to the OG Temple Berserker and Cruel Taskmaster. This combo, if you can get it out early with the Temple Berserker and Inner Rage, or coin Temple Berserker and then Cruel Taskmaster, and then Bloodsworn Mercenary, absolutely phenomenal. It can win the game turn 2 or 3. It's very hard for most classes to deal with 2 minions with Reborn that both have 5 attack. Like, sure, you can ping them off, but they're just going to come back and still be 3/1s that can not only hit you in the face because you probably needed to trade something into them to kill them in the first place, but if you have a minion on the board, you can value trade into them because it is only a 2-mana card, probably dealing with a pretty sizable minion, and trading up because it has 3 attacks. So, multiple things good about the combo. And also, the just 10 damage turn 3 potentially with the Bloodsworn Mercenary is phenomenal. And I kept in like the Armor Smith and stuff because the added armor, especially into something like Hunter, is just very needed in order to get to the Galakrond. And although you can't proc it as much, and you can't proc Acolyte of Pain as much, you do still have things like Awaken. You can ping your own thing with Inner Rage. You do have a Cruel Taskmaster. You can trade into small token minions and get some stuff that way. Overall, it still works. It's just not as good. And then obviously you get to Galakrond, you burst them down with your Invoke, charge minions, and your weapon, and that's basically how this deck is going to run. Runs very similarly. The overall cost of this deck was actually still kind of expensive, 6,600. We have to keep in mind Galakrond was given to you for free, and this has 3 epics that are pretty needed in the deck. Town Crier, you need the extra card draw on this deck just so you could reliably get to Galakrond, who's your win condition. You need the Bloodsworn Mercenary to duplicate in order for extra charge and just extra value minions in general, like the Temple Berserker. And Scion of Ruin is just a 4-mana busted card. So hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys want me to play these decks to prove that they're actually decent, please tell me. Let me know in the comments. I'd be more than happy to play them. If you like this content, subscribe. If you want me to do another list like this, put that in the comments as well, whether it be like a top 5 just tier list, a tier list for each specific class, or just like a discussion video like what I think will happen in Hall of Fame, or any number of things. I would be happy to do those if you guys show an interest. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you in the next one.